Always good to overcome the challenges of technology. But good afternoon, everyone. We've conducted these media visits via video conference the last few years to bring more of you in, and I welcome you to this conversation, and we appreciate your participation. Typically on this Thursday, I am in Atlanta conducting this press conference. Today, though, I'm in my office in Birmingham. As soon as we wrap up our visit today, I will head to a memorial service honoring Bill Battle. Many of you knew Bill, or all of you probably knew of Bill, who was a student athlete in the SEC. He had a coaching career that included serving as a graduate assistant at Oklahoma, an assistant coach at West Point, the head football coach at the University of Tennessee. He was an athletics director at the University of Alabama as I became commissioner back in 2015, and obviously in between was an innovator forming what we knew as the Collegiate Licensing Company. Bill was a colleague and friend to us all. He is going to be missed, but fondly remembered. I also learned this morning that we lost another one of our friends, Bob Holt. Bob was a longtime sports writer with the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Bob was always quick to have a question, and that question was uniformly accompanied by some form of smile. Always a good visit. And it was incredibly sad to hear of his health struggles of the past few days and of his passing. And we extend our sympathies and condolences to Bob's colleagues, to his friends, and to his family. There's plenty of good news, though, all around us. I'm standing here today on a Thursday, heading into SEC football championship game weekend, incredibly proud of the success we've experienced in men's basketball, winning 14 of the 16 games in the SEC ACC Men's Basketball Challenge. Separate from those couple of days, our men's basketball is off to us an historically successful start over the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season. Plenty of basketball to play, but a great start for a great season filled with promise. On the women's basketball side, we won 4 of our first 6 games in the SEC ACC Women's Basketball Challenge. We have 10 more games this evening, and I'm looking forward to the competition with our ACC colleagues. And one final note before I jump into football, the NCAA volleyball tournament begins this evening. We have 9 teams competing. We wish all of them great success in the weeks ahead. We do head into this championship weekend. It is our 33rd SEC championship game, 31 of which have been played or will have been played in Atlanta. And when you look at national champions produced by the SEC during that time of our championship game, 14 times since 1992, the national championship game is played in the SEC championship game. And since 2006, that SEC championship to national championship has occurred on 10 occasions. As you know, we just finished our first season as a 16-team league. We played in that single standings format using an 8-game schedule. I've said, and I'll be happy to respond if you ask, that we will learn from this season. We will use the information gained from our competition to inform our decision-making as we move forward. Before I go to some media notes, I want to congratulate Missouri's quarterback, Brady Cook, who earlier today was named as the SEC Football Scholar Athlete of the Year. He joins Barrett Jones, who played at Alabama, and Tim Tebow, who you know played at Florida, as the only he's the only third repeat winner of the award, having won this on 2 occasions. As we look ahead to the College Football Hall of Fame, we have 5 inductees from SEC universities: Tim Couch from Kentucky, Dan Hampton from Arkansas, Antonio Langham from Alabama, Kevin Smith from Texas A&M, and Dewey Selman from Oklahoma. And we congratulate both Dewey and Zach Selman, who we've come to know in his role at Mississippi State University. This was also our first season returning, if you will, to ABC. We had a prior ABC relationship and then a decades-long agreement with CBS. We're going to finish the season as the most watched college football conference. This is the 3rd consecutive season we've achieved that mark. When you break down the viewership stats, SEC conference games, so those are games between Two SEC teams accounted for 4 of the top 5 most viewed games, and in 16 of the top 20 most watched games, at least one SEC team played in those games. A piece of the puzzle that was really important for us is to access more over-the-air broadcast TV. Obviously, that was with ABC, where we will have experienced over 40 over-the-air broadcast windows. We viewed that as a fan-friendly opportunity, noting the wide exposure and broad access to over-the-air television. In the past, so last year, if we were operating in that same model, we would have had only 15 games on over-the-air TV. And on 9 of the 14 Saturdays of the college football season, we experienced noon, midday, and primetime games consecutively. And we appreciate Bob Iger and his leadership of Disney, Jimmy Pitaro, and his leadership of ABC and ESPN, along with the work of Roz Durant, Burke Magnus, and their broad teams to present really effectively the great SEC competition from our venues. Before I begin the Q&A session, I'll just note I did begin my morning in Atlanta, where we had our 9th consecutive student athlete career tour, where we had over 30 young people from our university campuses who are former SEC student athletes being introduced to the world of career opportunities. We appreciate our colleagues from Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, One Digital, Southern Company, and they ended their experience visiting Porsche Cars of North America, which I'm sorry to have missed that part of the trip, where they met executives, they had conversations about interview tactics, how they prepare a resume, and how they, move from their collegiate student athlete experience into career opportunities. So Kevin, with that, I'll turn the management of our press visit over to you and do my best to be responsive to the questions that are asked.
Thank you, Commissioner. Again, if you have a question, please use the raise hand function. We'll unmute your line, and then we'll lower your hand and mute your line as he answers the question, and we'll work our way through the question queue. Our first question will come from Kirk Bowles of the Houston Chronicle. Kirk?
Morning, Greg. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You've got to make that time change from working for the Austin paper to the Houston paper.
Working too hard here. A question about rematches in the playoff. Asked Ward Manuel about it, and he said they were kind of under directive from all the conference commissioners that they wanted no consideration of that. And would rematches of conference pairings, would it hurt the appeal of the playoffs and TV numbers at all, you think?
Based on the numbers I just reviewed for our TV viewership, I would suggest not. I don't know that directive. The expectation is that the committee rank the teams. If we have the opportunity to have 4 or more teams in a 12-team playoff, you are going to have rematches. Part of that is when they occur. So that would be a reality given the number of opportunities we certainly hope to access.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go to Thomas Jones of the Austin American-Statesman. Thomas?
How are we doing? How much weight should the results of a conference championship game carry in the CFP rankings, specifically relating to a team that loses a title game? You don't have to worry about it this year, probably, but in general.
I don't view that all championship games are equal. So you asked me a question that applies broadly to championship games. In our circumstance with 2 highly rated teams, I think both teams should be respected for the quality of competition in which they will engage on Saturday. I think the Big 12 has much the same circumstance. I heard Sark talk about being in the game in 2016, and you had a pretty significant disparity between teams. Alabama won that, advanced to the playoff consistently, and I think the answer is a reality of each of those games and the quality of competition. I think we're at the highest of that order and would expect a great game, and the committee will have to decide. But I would anticipate they'll respect that high level of competition and there wouldn't be a lot of variance given the results. There is, though, as you know, a significant reward for winning, and that is the opportunity to avoid that first round game, have an understanding of the possible opponents, and prepare for a bowl destination a few weeks down the road.
Thanks, Greg.
Next question will come from Seth Emerson of The Athletic. Seth.
Hey, Greg, kind of piggybacking on that, in terms of the value of championship games, would you seek in the next playoff negotiations some sort of assurance to make sure this game isn't a detriment, whether it's including automatic berths for both participants or get rid of automatic buys for the first four so that the loser of the game, isn't fifth at worst?
Hi, Seth. I think one of the realities in answering this question is we have to leave just the now for a moment and understand questions about the impact of championship games go back to that very first one in '92. And you can actually watch the movie that ESPN Productions produced and hear Roy Kramer talking about, hey, this may not have worked if the outcome's different. So there's always been pressures around these championship games and impacts upon the national championship. I think that's part of the competitive pressure. And I just heard both coaches talk about competitors wanting to seat that competition. They want those hard tests. As it relates to the current format, so we'll skip over the decade since, and there have been times where the impact of even our championship game may have removed a team from the national championship limelight. Typically, we're accustomed to that working in the opposite direction. But let's come to now. What has to be remembered is the task that was put in front of the working group was to look at a format for the 26th season and beyond. And then the College Football Playoff Board of Directors, working with the management committee, asked for a review to see if it could happen earlier. From the time of the 12-team format being introduced in 21, there was a year delay, and that resulted from our expansion with Oklahoma and Texas. The next year, the Big Ten expanded, and all of a sudden, our colleagues desired to hit the accelerator pedal, and we lost a year of preparation time that's impossible to recover. We do have an opportunity to go through these 2 years of experience under existing contracts, and during that process, look anew at some of the format issues, and I look forward to that. And what I've said repeatedly is we actually have to go through the 12-team format process. And to your question about adjustments around buys, seeding adjustments that could be made, others have spoken about so-called automatic qualification. There'll be a time for those conversations. I think that's after we go through this experience. And we have to do so in the context of what has happened during the Bowl Coalition experience, learn from the BCS, the CFP at 4, and the CFP at 12.
All right, we'll next go to David Eckert of the Austin American-Statesman. David?
Hi, Greg. Appreciate the time. I'm curious, you touched on the basketball success there kind of in your opening remarks. I'm curious, to what extent, if at all, do you believe that that's kind of a product of the, I guess, increasingly lucrative television contracts that the conference has signed and kind of enabling the schools to devote some more resources to that?
I don't view it that narrowly, because you don't just flip a switch and go from in 2015, 2016, March of 2016 in particular, my first year as the SEC commissioner, having only 3 teams selected to play in the NCAA tournament, and one of those 3 being assigned to Dayton. That year, Texas A&M was our only team to advance to the Sweet 16. And I think the comparison there is we've had a long period of growth. I think that's about commitment to discussing the right issues. I brought Mike Tranghese in, and he sent me a nice text this morning, and I thanked him for his work to help us move from what used to be really an RPI-based conversation to let's talk about the broad culture of men's basketball and how we improve. We've looked at continuity of coaches, and we had a decade where a lot of variance in who coached our teams. Really, I think Vanderbilt and Florida with Kevin Stallings and Billy Donovan from like 2004 to 14, that was the point of continuity, and everybody else had change. We've we've seen more continuity in recent years of coaches. And I think that's a commitment to the programs, to the staffing, to the coaches, to the facilities, to the fans coming in to incredible venues, and building that excitement. I think that's a lot of what happens. Sure, there's a lot that happened with our new TV contract, but I don't think you reduce what's happened in basketball to that moment or that change. I think it goes back to a lot of building. And at 6:30 Eastern this morning, I sent a text to all 16 athletics directors thanking and praising them for their contributions and their support to make this progress and make these achievements possible in men's basketball. But we've experienced this kind of success in women's basketball, the last three defending national champions, for example, and I could go on, but you'd probably start rolling your eyes because I'd open the brag bag again.
Appreciate it, Greg. Thanks.
Yep.
We'll go to Chip Towers of the AJC. Chip.
Yeah. Hey, Greg, appreciate your time today. We talked to you extensively back in Dallas and, in the days and months leading up to them about the impact of Texas and Oklahoma moving into this league. First year, here's Texas in the biggest game. Can you just give us an idea of what that means, in the big pictures, what an accomplishment it was? And then, I understand there might be a little burnt orange in Atlanta on Saturday. So can you just kind of speak to that?
A couple of things. First, when we added both Oklahoma and Texas, we knew we were adding two of the five most historically successful football programs at the college level. So given their track record, you do expect a level of success. We also had what I think is pretty unique, which is about the longest runway to entry from invitation. So we made that announcement of expansion in late July 2021, and there were just over 3 years to adjust. Remember, we had that Texas at Arkansas game in the fall of 21, September of 21, shortly after. So a little bit of experience. Steve came in to lead the Texas program around that same time frame and had the experience on Nick's staff at Alabama. So I think there's a lot that goes into that success: the history, the support, the head coach, the ability to grow their success in the Big 12 for both of them. And you always go through adjustments in coaching, and you're seeing some of that, I think, with Brent and his staff at the University of Oklahoma, and they'll continue to build there given their history. So I expected that they'd make a contribution. I expected that to compete at a high level in an incredibly deep league this year, and they've achieved the opportunity to play for the SEC championship in year one. I think that's exciting for the present, and you saw that reflected in attendance, the interest when both of those programs, Oklahoma and Texas, visited new places in the SEC. I can recall traveling through Memphis when that was kind of a Delta hub a few years ago. I was traveling out west the Sunday after Texas played at Ole Miss, and there was an incredible volume of burnt orange. And so I've always known that fan base travels. And I think that's exactly what we experience in the SEC. And I know the Alabama fans who traveled to Oklahoma did so in great numbers. Watching Tennessee travel to Norman, Oklahoma. I had a conversation with Chris Del Conte the Monday after the Kentucky game, and I'd had it along, but I had used Kentucky as an example that when Kentucky played football at College Station the first time, they had like 10 or 12,000 fans make that trip. And I think that's one of the different dynamics here, and a great credit to our fans, whether it's an SEC championship game or one of our high-level, high-interest regular season games. They want to travel and be a part of our communities and our competition.
Next question will come from Chris Lowe of ESPN. Chris?
Sorry about that, Greg. I had to unmute. Hey, I'm sure you're surprised at the angst, debate, and lobbying going on now as we get ready for the last ranking. But someone mentioned Roy a minute ago. What is your reaction when you hear now administrators, even ADs in your own league, saying, well, maybe it's time to go back to the BCS ranking to figure out which teams deserve to be in?
That's why, and some of you may have rolled your eyes, I went back to the historical perspective when Seth asked me the question about our championship game and the impact on the postseason. And I think all of that has to be understood. And I was an associate commissioner doing some support work, sitting in the old BCS era meetings, listening to the churn over the BCS rankings. And remember, that approach changed regularly, like sometimes an annual basis with a tweak here and tweak there. And one of the things that did not happen for a decade in the college football playoff is the annual cycle of change. And I do think one element that has been forgotten is we don't want to go through change every year. We want to work to get things right. Now, I know that we're in this new era, and that's going to cause a lot of questions. And my perspective, in having lost the year of preparation that we can't recover, means we're going to have more of these adjustment conversations. And I think some of the observations are fair, not all. And I think some of the observations have to be distilled. So comments about the committee and where people should be, particularly if you're in that 12th ranking, because you might be displaced by a lower ranked team, which was an accommodation for conference champions. And when I hear people talk about that positioning, I think what they're actually saying is not a discussion about the committee's placement of the team, but should we be providing these lower seed conference champions that access point? That's been discussed before, and I think that starts to illustrate one of the new issues. Another one of the new issues, and I raised it in the meetings, and Jack Swarbrick was with me, but not many others, is reseeding after the first round, because there are allocations for the top 4 conference champions. Notre Dame could be in the top 4 and slide to a lower seed, yet still have earned that higher ranking. And that was just not an accommodation the room was ready to make. And I think we'll look at this and probably have another one of those types of conversations. I'll also offer that we have to learn to learn and adapt in a time efficient manner. So using a John Wooden maxim, we need to be quick but not hurry. I don't want us to just react. I want us to be thoughtful in how we consider these issues. And as I said before, going through the playoff and then looking at adjustment is the appropriate time frame.
Our next question comes from Jim Vertuno of the Associated Press. Jim?
Yes, hello, good afternoon. Texas sent you its investigation report in response after the bottle throwing incident back in October. Texas said it could not identify anyone responsible. Are you satisfied with their effort and their report after such a disruptive event? And depending on your answer, I guess, if you could maybe elaborate on why or why not.
Well, I don't comment on my communication back and forth with my schools. They answered directly and clearly. In fact, I give President Hartzell, Chris Del Conte, and even the chair of their board credit for being very clear immediately that conduct fails to meet their own expectations. I think that's really important. One of the learning experience we've had, and this isn't the only bottle throwing experience, is we don't always have cameras where there need to be cameras. And so we will work to see how our stadiums may adjust. The issue, big picture, is not completed. It's not concluded. We will have off-season, in fact, sooner rather than later, conversations about field rushing issues. I think we may have set a record in the number, and those create problems. And we have to be aware of those problems. I understand the notion of celebratory events. So that's one. The crowd conduct. So there wasn't simply one bottle throwing or debris throwing incident in our league or even nationally. And we have to have a better management policy in place across the league. I also know that we saw last week conduct issues in rivalry games, and we have dealt with those previously within some of our in-conference rivalries, and I haven't had much of a flag planting issue. I look at what happened earlier in the day, and I think that multiplied itself later in the day, but we have to be better than each of those elements, and each of those will be part of our conversation, as I noted, beginning sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
All right, we will now take our final question from David Rumsey of Front Office Sports. David?
Commissioner, if we're just looking at this year's projected bracket, and if we do end up with 4 teams each from the SEC and Big Ten, in your mind, is that kind of playoff makeup good for the sport on an annual basis? And
You're asking me to project out for years. And I'm wearing an SEC pin, you may have noticed. So people have asked me, what is my objective? I'd love to have 8 teams. So the conference champion, and then there's 7 at-larges. People would opine about whether that's good or not. I think that's the reality of college football. This conference, the Southeastern Conference, is unique in our rigor and our depth. And I think that has to be understood and recognized. The places in which we play, the level of competition. You may be the 8th place team. And if you look at our non-conference record against our Power 4 colleagues, we establish ourselves uniquely as a successful and a competitive conference. So I view that as a reality, and I would expect ourselves to continue to achieve at that level, maybe even beyond. And by the way, I don't view that as inconsistent with other sports, where in softball, every one of our 13 teams plays in the NCAA tournament in most of the recent years. We've had that in women's golf. I look at the projections now to have 12 SEC teams in the NCAA tournament field. Now, those numbers are 64 or 68, but I want us to achieve at the high level, and I want us to be proud of that in an unapologetic manner.
thanks.
Commissioner Sankey, thank you for your time this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you back here in Atlanta for the SEC Football Championship game on Saturday.
Thank you. Be well, everyone.